Good evening and welcome to NSSC's Quarterly Peer Talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ann Cochran, Executive Director of the National Shatter and Silence Coalition. I asked to do the introduction tonight as this is a story, one that I felt a personal connection to. I have followed Michael and Matt's story since I first started my advocacy work back in 2021 and read their book, A Father's Love. Their story is a reminder that no matter how devastating things in our lives may seem, that there is hope for a better future. Matthew Stick was born on June 27, 1992 at the Cherokee Nation's W.W. Hastings Hospital, the Cherokee capital of Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He is diagnosed with a mental illness and is currently in recovery. Matt, who is one-fourth Cherokee, is a self-taught artist with a unique life story. At the age of 17, he made the decision to make art his life's work and career. Art can be therapeutic, and for Matt, it is his healing and his life. His work is influenced by his Cherokee heritage as well as his background as a graffiti street artist. Art has been his passion as well as an aid to his healing. Matt is an amazing artist, and you can find his work on his website, artbymattstick.com. Michael Stick, Matt's father, is both a minister and a teacher, holding a bachelor's degree in education as well as a master's and doctorate in theology and ministry. He is passionate about advocating for those who live with serious mental illnesses. Michael is involved as a volunteer with NAMI, leading support groups as well as teaching family-to-family classes. Michael's father was full-blood Cherokee. Michael loves to explore his native heritage and learn about the history of Indigenous people. He has 3 adult children, Jordan, Matt, and Katie. His daughter Katie is due with his first grandchild in December. I'm going to show a short video here, and then they will get started. Let's see.
My name is Michael Stick, and I've been a pastor for over 25 years, a father for over 25 years, and a husband for many, many years. I do remember being a father for the first time. I remember the expectancy. I remember the joy. We had high expectations for all of our kids, as any parent should. We wanted the best for our kids. And, sometimes things don't turn out exactly the way we want. And sometimes God has plans for us and paths for us that we never in our wildest dreams thought we'd have to walk down. Veronica and I noticed some changes, some things in my youngest son, Matt, or Bub. We noticed, and she noticed at first, some depression, some sadness, some things that I didn't really see. And then as he grew older, and graduated from high school, I began seeing changes in him. Veronica took me to work, and I told her goodbye. And after school, I got a phone call, a little bit after 3, and it was my son. And he was very disturbed, frantic, in fact, that something had happened. And he sounded like a child, and something was very, very wrong. I knew something was wrong, I just had no idea what. I pulled up in front of the house, and there were fire trucks, ambulance, and people in my front yard. And I walked up, and I saw my wife lying on the ground. And as I got closer, I saw that they were trying to revive her, that she had a hole in her chest. I knew she's gone. That day, my son had with an undiagnosed mental illness, had a psychotic breakdown, I guess, if you will. And he thought that he was trying to save her soul. And instead, he took a knife and plunged a knife through her heart and killed her almost instantly. The Bible says that Jesus is our mediator between God and the Father. He's our advocate. He's one that stands, for God through us, through his blood. And there was a point in my son's life as he was arrested that he had no voice. He had no one to speak for him. He couldn't speak for himself, especially in his mental illness and in his incarceration. And at that point, I knew that I needed to be his advocate. I needed to be his voice. I started making phone calls, contacting people, trying to get our story told, trying to make people aware of where he was and what was happening. Just recently, he was declared not guilty by reason of insanity and will be going to the Oklahoma Forensic Center for treatment. And now our hope has changed. Before we hoped to keep him out of prison, we hoped that his mind would return someday. Now we have hope for healing. We have hope that through the doctors there, that he'll be good enough someday and well enough someday to come home. On October 5th, 2012, my wife went to be with the Lord. And she went at the hand of my son. And I knew that. And yet I loved him. I still love him. I'll always love him. And it doesn't matter what he does or what he did. I love my son. I would give my own life for him if I could.
And it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for tonight's presentation, Michael and Matt Stick.
Hi, good evening. I want to first of all say thank you for allowing us to be a part of this. Matt and I like to share our story every opportunity that we get, just in the hopes that what happened and how we've been able to overcome would be of help to someone else. As you saw in the video, that was 2015 and almost 10 years ago. And in June of this year, my son came home. He's here on conditional release, something that we waited for 10 years for. But I want to tell you just a little bit about our story, and then I'll let Matt tell from his perspective what happened. My wife struggled for most of her life. I met her when she was 16 years old. I was in college, and she struggled with depression. She was diagnosed later with major depressive disorder. Her mother, we found out at one point that her mother had dissociative identity disorder and several other things, we believe. And so we knew that mental illness was in the family. And it was always a struggle. My wife, Veronica, would lay in bed for days and just cry. And there was absolutely nothing that we could do about it. At the time when Matt was in high school, I was a church planter, starting a church. And so I was very busy. I was also a school teacher. And she was so in tune with Matt. And she noticed that when he was about 16, of course, he'll tell his side. I think it started earlier than that, but he began struggling with depression. And I didn't see it the way she did. And then when he was about to turn 20, we went to, here in Oklahoma, which is the home of the Cherokee Nation, the Western Cherokees anyway, we have several Native American or Indian hospitals. And so we took him to one, and there we were told that they don't do anything with mental health. A few months later, we went back and we found out that they did. And we were put on a waiting list for an evaluation about 3 months ahead of time. And in the meantime, Matt began to struggle. He began to spiral down. In the book that we wrote, A Father's Love, we go into a lot of detail about that spiral and the effect that it had on him. You know, when we look back, and all of us I know are like that, and as the old saying goes, hindsight's 2020. I was totally ignorant of mental illness, of everything at that point. Um, I wish I knew then what I know now, but don't we all? Well, Matt began having hour-long blackouts, and he'll tell you more about that. And so we knew that something was wrong, but we didn't know what was wrong. And I got a call one day on October 5th, and that's when everything, just our whole life changed. Um, as I said in the video, Matt was just frantic. He was like a little child. And I know now that he had had a psychotic break. And at that time, of course, we didn't know that. And so I ran home, rushed home from school as fast as I could. And that's when we found my wife. Um, Matt was arrested, and we spent the next 2.5 years waiting for a trial. He spent about 22, I believe 22 months in isolation. Um, I tried to visit him when it first happened and couldn't. My friend, who's also a pastor, went in and they allowed him to go back to visit. And they said that he was in his cell. He had stripped all of his clothes off, and and they thought he was high on drugs. And it turns out he was completely just psychotic. In fact, one doctor who evaluated him 6 days after it happened told me later that he was so far gone that he couldn't even do an evaluation. And he was as far gone as he'd ever seen anyone. It was 5 weeks before I was able to visit Matt almost every day. I would go to the jail here in Tulsa County. It's called the David L. Moss Correctional Center. I would go in and try to visit, and they would say no. I'd go in the parking lot and just cry. And finally, one day, they said, yes, you can visit today. And so when I went in and walked down those halls, and it was through glass, it was like I was talking to my 8-year-old son again. And he had no idea where he was, no idea what was happening. And all he could tell me was, I want to go home. Dad, take me home. It'd be 10 years before I was able to do that. Matt slowly, with medication, slowly began coming out of his psychosis. And about 2.5 years later, his doctor in jail told me that he was in recovery and that he was doing great. And it was obvious that he was. But I thought that, as I said, I thought I lost my wife and my son. And that was very difficult. My other two children and I stood together with my family and supported Matt through everything because we knew exactly what had happened. We knew that it wasn't him. Matt loved his mother more than anything. It would never hurt her intentionally. In fact, there's one chapter called, or I don't know, remember what the chapter is called, but we see this as an act of love, what he did, because he was trying to save her. And instead, well, you know what happened. I'm going to let Matt tell a little bit about his story, or his side, his perspective. And in a little while, we are totally open to answering any questions, whether it be about the judicial system and what we went through, and that was a struggle, or what we went through with our story, or how we maintained our hope, how we kept hope alive. And we just have, and we'll be glad to answer anything that you want. But Matt, why don't you go ahead and tell your perspective?
Okay, so hey everyone. So I guess I'll start off from the beginning. My dad said 16. It was actually earlier than that. It was probably around the age of 13, I would say, that I began to experience, mental health problems. It started off with depression and anxiety. And I dealt with that for years, and I didn't it was to varying degrees at different points, but yeah, it started getting pretty bad. And around the age of 19 is whenever I um, started having it just started going just completely downhill. And that was when I believe I first saw had my first hallucination. I was actually it was the night that I met a girl that I ended up dating for a while and ended up becoming really good friends with. But I ended up believing I saw what I thought was a ghost that night. And after that, it was just it, off and on. I would experience these just very bizarre, strange things. I would see things that were looking back now clearly not there. I would look up at the ceiling while I'd be laying in bed and I'd see foxes and animals dancing around on the ceiling. I'd be driving my car and I would look down on the pavement and I would see faces coming out of the pavement. Um, and the blackouts that he mentioned, I'd be sitting at my computer in my room typing away, and all of a sudden I would be across town in a neighborhood and I would have no idea how I got there, just driving in my car, and I would have to find my way home. And just things like that happened. And at the time I didn't understand them. I knew what depression was. I knew what anxiety was, but I didn't understand psychosis. I didn't understand what hallucinations and delusions really were. I didn't understand that I was having them. Um, so, it was a very difficult time, and it all kind of came to a head shortly after we were trying to get that evaluation for me. They said, it would be 3 months, and of course, 3 weeks later is when everything happened. And I was actually sitting in my living room with my mom and we were watching a show together. And it was, she said that she wanted me to watch it. It was an apocalyptic TV show. And when I saw the character on the show and the main character, it was like, it was like a light switch in my mind just flipped. And I don't know how else to explain it other than that. It was almost like I was suddenly thrown into a completely different universe where the apocalypse had begun, and that I believe that demons, evil spirits, were taking over the world. And I suddenly became convinced that I was chosen to battle these demons. And I thought that once they took control of somebody, and that's what I believe they were doing all over the world, they were taking control of people and forcing them to do horrible things, and I thought that it was irreversible. And there were voices that told me that they had my mom, and that the only way for me to save her soul, the only way for me to rescue her, and uh, the only way for me to save her was to take her life. I don't even think I fully understood what that even meant at the time. I didn't understand what death was. I didn't understand that I wasn't going to see my mom again in this life. And I ended up taking her life that day. And I was arrested shortly after that, and I went peacefully. I didn't even understand I was being arrested at the time, but I woke up in jail and I was in a cell and I was naked. And by the way, Dad, I didn't strip my clothes off; they took my clothes. Um, I was in a cell naked and I didn't know what was going on, and I was just experiencing all these just horrifying things. I mean, I'm not even going to get too much into all of that, but it was just a horrific experience all around. And yeah, I spent 23 months in isolation and then another 10 months on a max pod, which was, an open pod with about 100 other people. And, eventually I had my trial, and the judge declared that I wasn't in a state of mind where I was capable of understanding what I did, that I was in a state of mind where I could be held responsible for what happened at the time. And he even said, if I remember right, that he said it's not even that he thinks that this is what happened. He said that the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. And I was declared not guilty by reason of insanity. And since then, they've started calling it not guilty by reason of mental illness, but it was the same thing. But
May I interject?
Yes.
Matt was actually diagnosed while he was still at the David O. Moss Correctional Center with bipolar
Yeah.
1 disorder with psychotic features. And then the defense attorney plus the prosecution and the experts they called in to evaluate him came to the same conclusion that he had bipolar 1 disorder.
Yeah. So. And for those of you that don't know what that really means, bipolar disorder is a mood disorder, and what it means is that you have it was also called manic depressive back in the day, and it means you have manic highs, which is elevated energy, no need for sleep, you don't eat, you're talking 1,000 words a minute, million thoughts racing through your head, and you also experience depression, lows, which people know what those are typically. That's where you have no energy, you are just have no hope for your life. You're, experiencing severe, it can even get to the point that you're having suicidal ideations. And it's just debilitating. And bipolar disorder means that you cycle between the highs and the lows. And the with psychotic features part, that's another extension of the diagnosis. That basically means that whenever you're experiencing a severe mood swing, whether that be depression or mania, or even a mixed episode, which is where you have elements of both, you can experience psychosis, which of course is hearing things, seeing things that aren't there, hallucinations, and delusions. And delusions are largely what I experienced, which were thoughts and beliefs that aren't based in reality, that are held despite clear evidence of the contrary. When a person's experiencing delusions, they're so real to the person, it's indistinguishable from the world that we live in. As if I were to tell you that, the sky is blue or that the grass is green, it seems so obvious to the average person. It's so obviously fact. You don't doubt it a single bit for even a second. Of course, that's reality. When you're experiencing a delusion, those delusions are just as real, just as true in your mind. And, I've said it so many times that if there was even a shred of doubt in my mind that what I was experiencing wasn't reality, that I would never, ever have done what I did.
I mean, at his evaluation, when our first psychologist came, it was 6 days after his psychotic break. And he described it as, of course, he was manic, but as having 80 thoughts in his head with 20 or 30 of them trying to come out all at the same time. And he spent 2 hours with him and said he was too psychotic to even test. And so we finally got a diagnosis from him, but it was later.
Yeah. And at the time that I remember bits and pieces of those evaluations, and I didn't even know who I was talking to. I didn't know. I actually, at one point, I believed that the psychologist was, because I had a friend of mine who was in school for psychology, and I believed that this psychologist was a reincarnation of her. And I just, like I said, just the things that your mind tells you are true when you're in that mind state. I mean,
and our book has a lot of his writings from psychosis that made perfect sense to him at the time, but make absolutely no sense now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just one thing I really want to stress is that when you are experiencing the delusions and hallucinations, it's so real. It is so real to you. There's not a single shred of doubt in a person's mind that's reality to them. And
well, at his trial here in Oklahoma, we had the option of having a bench trial with the judge only, which we opted for instead of a jury trial. And that was when he was found not guilty. That took, the trial lasted, it was very short. They just presented the evidence, and then it took 2 weeks for him to come to a conclusion, which was excruciating, I might say, during that 2 weeks waiting for the verdict. But that was a good day. That was a very happy day. Matt was sent to the Oklahoma Forensic Center. And I'm not sure what state anyone else is in, what you have there, but that's a state-owned facility, of course. And he would stay there indefinitely that was the ruling.
Yeah.
And so,
So at least here in Oklahoma, whenever you enter the what they call the NGRI program, whenever you enter the mental health state mental health system in Oklahoma, um, there's no time frame. They don't give you a release date. Like if you were to go to prison, they it's indefinite. You don't know when or if you're ever going to be released. And that's a that was a really scary thing. Um, so we, for a very long time, didn't even know for sure if I was coming home ever. And so while I was in there, I'm not going to get into too much detail about, the place or anything. There were good things and bad things about it, of course, like everywhere else. But you know, I I ended up making it through the entire time without a single write up, a single rule infraction, a single fight. As they told me that I had perfect behavior the entire time, which um, wasn't too difficult, but still was. Every single day was. I had to do everything I could to make sure that I was abiding by every single rule and because my release was dependent on, of course, my behavior as well as my mental health condition and all of that. So shortly before actually that I arrived at OFC when I was still in jail, I was basically asymptomatic. I wasn't having any kind of symptoms at that point. And when I got to the Oklahoma Forensic Center, I didn't have symptoms the entire time. And that's something that, some people are kind of a little bit confused about because um, whenever you become asymptomatic, whenever you're not having symptoms and you're in that program, it doesn't mean that you just get to go home suddenly. I had to show for a very long time that I was, that I was stable, that I was well, that I was willing to take my medication, that I had to go through literally thousands of hours of groups, therapy and group therapy and all of that. And just to basically prove that I was going to, that I was willing, that I wanted to make something of myself and, return to society one day.
and I will say too about medication, he is on the same medication today that he was when they started on him.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful psychiatrist there in the jail who started him on Cyprexa and Celexa, yeah. And he's still the same.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
so that's one thing that a lot of people have trouble with whenever they're experiencing their diagnosis is that it's hard to find medications that work for most people. And some people, they'll go through several, if not dozens, of different medications over the course of their life, trying to find something that's going to work for them and that's going to continue to work for them.
and my wife Veronica, for the last 10 years of her life, they changed medications constantly and never did find things that would work for her. I believe she is med resistant now, but at the time they just try something for a month, try something else, try combinations, and nothing ever worked. One thing that I really want to stress is the love and support that our family showed to him. Uh, we know that support is the most important thing. That we wanted Matt to know that he wasn't alone, that he was loved, and that we were waiting for him. I visited him about 3 times a week when he was in the jail. And then once he was at OFC, I visited at least once a week. And my mother and I visited for probably, I think, about 3 or 4 years until she passed away. And then I continued to visit every week until he came home.
And I also will add to that the family support and my family being there for me and loving me and understanding, my condition and what I was going through. And that was the most vital thing when it came to my recovery. It was so important. It made such a huge difference to know that people cared about me and that nobody blamed me. Nobody that knew me, that knew my family, that knew my mom blamed me for what happened. Um, that was just that was healing in and of itself, and between that and um, between my family and my friends and, the medication, the doctors there, and, my artwork that I was able to do the entire time I was in there, it all kind of came together and helped me to, come out on the other side.
Well, I know that that we want to have a time for questions, and we also want to show you what's happening now. You know, what happened and him coming home was the big thing, but we have this thing called hope and hope for the future, which we always had, but it's so strong now. And Matt's future is an art. We both believe, and that's where his passion and his heart is. And so, before we close in a little bit, we'll show you some of his artwork. But if you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer some now.
Thank you, Michael and Matt, for sharing your story of unimaginable loss and grief. You bring us all hope. And I wanted to just share, this is a book here, which I think now, Michael, you said is just available on Kindle through Amazon, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
it's only $3. We made it as cheap as we could, so that
it's called A
anyone could
Father's
get this.
Love, and that chapter you were referring to is chapter 5. It was called An Act of Love. So I am going to call on people. I think everybody can.
Hold on.
Yep.
Can everybody try to turn on their video? Keep yourself muted, but turn on your video. Okay. There you go. Awesome. If you raise your hand, Anne will call on you and you can unmute yourself and then mute yourself back up so you can hear the response.
Thank you, Marcy.
Jeff already has his hand up.
I was just going to call on Jeff as I saw his hand up. Jeff, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me all right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to ask Matt, how important was spirituality to your recovery? Or has it
So
been in your life?
absolutely vital for me.
Yeah.
It was very, very, it was difficult at first dealing with spirituality just because of the nature of my delusions and everything. It was hard to kind of separate, my true spirituality and the delusions and stuff that I was experiencing. Well, once I started coming out of that, and I realized, hey, you know, God is there and he does love me and he does care for me. And somehow this happened. And I don't know why he allowed it to happen. I don't know if I'll ever understand in this life why he allowed these things to happen in our lives, but he did. And, I told myself, I could be bitter about it. I could hate God. I could, just shy away from anything that has to do with him. But what I decided is that instead I was going to look to him for hope and believe that somehow, even in the worst of the things that this life has to offer, that that good things can come from it somehow, some way. And that's what I chose to believe.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
Laura, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, Laura, I just saw her hand go up. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for being here, you guys. I had written down questions during your speech. I wanted to know how many months or weeks or days before the event occurred were you having hallucinations?
So it's hard to pinpoint exactly when those began. I would say I believe the first time that I experienced the first hallucination that I remember that I can look back on was, like I said, that night that I thought I saw that ghost, and that was almost close to being exactly a year before my mother passed away. So yeah, so it was on and off, and like I said, it was hard to pinpoint exactly where it was, but I'm pretty sure that's about where it was. It was those last probably 9, 10, 11 months that
they were progressive in nature. They start off, slowly, and then more and more and more till the psychotic break.
Yeah.
So you actually, sorry. So you actually did you have any marijuana within the previous 6 months? I only asked for myself because of my story and my son.
Okay, so I had, yes, and the the first 19 years of my life, uh I didn't use any kind of substances at all. Like I had actually never even drank alcohol. And I started experiencing these symptoms, and I actually was not using any kind of substances when I started experiencing these hallucinations and stuff. But after about, I would estimate about 3 or 4 months of experiencing these things, I was in such a bad mind state, and I was having, you know, the hallucinations and delusions, and it was getting so bad. And that was when I ended up trying to self-medicate with marijuana. Um,
I
so I'm sorry.
I only say that they say it lasts in your body for 6 months after you've smoked, and if it was at all in between that time period, it could have just erupted or exacerbated. And if you're under the age of 20 or 30 for men, you're more susceptible to marijuana. And our family didn't know this when my son had cannabis induced psychosis, and it ruined the path that he was on. So I just want others to be aware because I wasn't. And if that could be part of the awareness you bring as well, would be
So
helpful.
so that's something that a lot of people don't understand or realize about cannabis is that if you are prone to experiencing psychosis, which I didn't know at the time that I was, that's what I was experiencing. But if you're prone to psychosis, that it is true that pot can exacerbate those symptoms, that it can make them come out in people that are prone to that. And yeah, so that was, I don't know, there's really no way to know for sure how, in my case, how much that had anything to do with it. But yeah, like I said, that is a factor, of course. So,
And it's not, there's no billboards, no commercials, nothing. I just also, before I give up my time, this is my painting that I own of Matt's. Anybody can, oh,
We can't see it, Laura.
you see,
oh,
oh,
now we
yes,
can.
beautiful.
isn't it beautiful? And it's one of my most prized possessions. And I truly think it's a healing painting. So for me and my family, I appreciate you so much.
Of course.
Thank you, Laura. I have mine, but I can't show it because it's all wrapped up. It's a Christmas gift for my son. Jerry, you have a question?
Thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing it so candidly. It's a really valuable story. I'm trying to turn this into a question, not just a comment, because I know I need to be brief. So I work for Helpline at Treatment Advocacy Center. So I talk to families all over the country who are in situations on either end of what's happened to your family. And a huge topic in this advocacy space is around whether psychosis in and of itself is dangerous enough to warrant treatment. And most of the treatment laws across the country say no, that the psychosis itself is not dangerous enough to warrant treatment unless it is causing behaviors that are harmful, which in a sense requires what happened instead of preventing what happened, right? So I have a friend in Oregon whose son was found guilty except for insanity on Monday after killing his mother last October. A super similar story of a young man in psychosis. A big difference is he had been hospitalized right before, and they did not determine that he was psychotic enough to warrant ongoing treatment. Anyway, I guess my question is, do you, Matthew, believe that your level of psychosis in and of itself was dangerous enough to warrant treatment, whether you wanted it or not, before this act of harm occurred?
So I would definitely say that I believe it was. It was definitely the problem is that, we didn't understand it, we didn't recognize it, but that's the problem with psychosis is that it doesn't necessarily, a person doesn't have to be what people would typically think of as, violent or evil in order for them to cause harm to somebody.
And even any psychosis is simply a sign that there's something wrong. Um, and so even, I mean,
I
to
mean,
me,
and
yeah, it doesn't
and
have to be harm.
and it's true that there are people that experience
Oh
psychosis
yeah,
for
see all
for
the
for a
time.
long time, for years, and it's a constant thing, and they don't end up hurting anybody. But at the same time, there's people uh, that end up hurting somebody, that do end up having something happen because
Themselves,
of
yeah.
it, and it's just you know there's no way that you can. I don't think there's a way that you can really determine what psychosis is worse than other psychosis. I mean, if your mind is in a reality that's different from this
Well,
world.
if you're in psychosis, you need treatment. It's that
Yeah,
simple.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said,
It's pretty
I don't
simple.
see a way that you can, say, oh, well, this person, their voices are telling them this, but this person's voices are a lot nicer. I mean, it's like, how do you determine that? I mean, psychosis is a very serious thing, no matter what. And it
Exactly.
all warrants treatment, every single, because you don't know. There's no way to understand it because whenever I was experiencing my psychosis, I wasn't hateful or angry. I wasn't yelling at people. I wasn't experiencing anything like that. My psychosis was actually based in trying to in my mind I was helping my mother. I
Mm-hmm.
was doing something that I believed was helping her, but in reality, obviously, it was the exact opposite. And that just goes to show that even people that aren't experiencing what you would call angry psychosis or whatever, they can still end up doing something terrible without even really understanding what they're doing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you for telling this to the world again and again and again, because we do not have a treatment system. We don't even have a crisis system that treats psychosis as a medical emergency. And so anything you can do to spread awareness that psychosis in and of itself is a medical emergency warranting treatment, regardless of whether the person understands that they're in psychosis. That's what we need. And thank you so much for lending your voice to that messaging, because it's profoundly important.
And I would like to say too that I realize that there are other people that share my story, our story. But from my perspective, I do have a support group. I have people in Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, Florida, and Massachusetts who are part of my support group that share the same story. So if you know anyone that has lost a loved one that needs that, please put them in contact with me. We do it by Zoom, of course. We don't meet each week or anything, but we've become a family, and so we're open to anyone that might need us.
Yeah, and it's difficult telling my story over and over again. It's hard, and this is something that I'm gonna have to deal with for the rest of my life. Is the memories of losing my mom and everything that happened afterwards, and that's. But it's something that I believe needs to be told. People need to
Absolutely.
understand it, and people need to see what serious mental illness can do, and what it can. But they also need to know the hope that we can find through it.
Jeff?
Yeah, I want to ask Matt, how did you get through those 2 years of isolation without medication?
I actually was medicated through those 2 years.
You were, okay.
I was, yes. So
It just took 2 years to come out of that psychosis.
yeah, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So
even with the meds.
so
they were,
I was probably about, I don't know exactly because I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I believe it was about 5 days, 6 days after arriving. I think that's what I was told at jail, that they had a jail psychiatrist, luckily, and he put me on medication. And I remember I didn't know what they were or why they were giving them to me. I didn't understand any of that, but I remember them handing them through the little hole in the door and saying, "Hey, take these." And I'm like, "What is it?" They're like, "Oh, it's going to help you." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'd take it. I didn't know what it was, but I eventually started coming out of psychosis, and yeah. So I was, looking at that regard, at least I did have access to medication and to treatment to some extent when I was in jail.
Thank you, Laura.
I just I think that's an example of why we need to have treatment at the onset of the illness, in terms of when you have untreated psychotic episodes each and every time, it does further damage to the brain. And that is why they become treatment resistant. Whereas you had the benefit of having consistent and immediate treatment for the earliest years of this illness onset. They say within the first 4 years, you have a better chance of a full recovery. Or so this is why it's so crucial, why your story needs to be told, because this is, out of all the circumstances, is the best outcome that could have happened. And we want that for others. If by the awful chance this happens, we want to have that same opportunity for them that you had through the miracle of your father and his church and all the community that supported you. I think it influenced this situation, this miracle. But my question is, would you make a loud noise out of the blue if you would have heard, if you are hearing voices? Do you hear voices, or it was only with visual hallucinations, or do you still have any now?
So I actually do not experience any kind of hallucinations now, no. Thank God. I haven't experienced hallucinations, whether that be visual or auditory, in over 10 years. It's been a very long time. But whenever I was experiencing them, it was largely, well, my psychosis was largely delusion. But I did also experience hallucinations. Sometimes they were auditory, sometimes they were visual. Mine kind of more leaned toward visual in the time before, and when I was in jail, actually, it was hard to tell what was auditory because there's so many noises in that jail and so many people talking and voices, and I didn't know exactly what was real and what wasn't, and that's again the reason why it's hard to tell at that time what I was experiencing was a hallucination or not. So, um, but yeah, like I said, I haven't experienced those in a very long time.
Well, would you?
Oh yeah. Oh, so I'm sorry.
This question is for your father. Did you notice that he had a different voice altogether? Like his voice changed into his 8-year-old voice. Did he change his voice in those 2 years that he was psychotic as well, to have any different accent or a different sound of a timbre to his voice, like he was a different person or anything?
No, I first visited him five weeks after his break, and that was when he was like he was a child again. And then slowly, he never really acted like that again. He was confused, and when I'd visit in the jail after that, but slowly that kind of went away, and he started becoming himself again. Um, there was an experience when it first happened, and he called me, that his voice was different, and he called me and said something's wrong, and he sounded like he was a real deep guttural voice. It was the strangest thing.
Mm-hmm.
He just told me I didn't understand him. He said, "I don't understand you," and that was the last I talked to him. So until that 5 weeks. So yeah, I did hear a couple of changes.
Do you think, Matt, if you knew more about what psychosis and hallucinations and fixed false beliefs and delusions were before you graduated high school or before you started seeing things at age 17, this would have made or break this outcome?
So I absolutely believe that this may have been prevented if we had education, and if I had known, like, let's say somebody had come to my school when I was in high school and talked about psychosis and had I really believe that that may have made a difference. Yes. The fact that we didn't understand or recognize it is one of the most,
And
biggest reasons.
part of what we do is educate. We want to educate people. We want people to understand, what mental illness is. We didn't know. Even though my wife struggled and her aunt struggled, we really didn't know. We were ignorant about it. And so we believe in educating. And
Absolutely. Yeah, and hopefully
that's why we
through
do this, yeah.
educating, we'll be able to prevent something like this from happening to other people. So
I heard someone you saw like an insect going across your sister's face at the breakfast table or something. Was that one of the hallucinations?
You saw them in the walls.
Oh.
I
No.
don't
I
remember
think
for sure. I probably did, to be honest. I'm sorry. I don't remember. I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember him telling me that he saw insects and things coming out of the walls, things
Yeah,
like that.
might be.
Yeah,
But
that's
I don't know if it's in the book or
Yeah,
just said it.
it's really difficult to remember, honestly, a lot of the stuff that I was experiencing at that time.
Oh, and that's another question. Sorry if it's still my time or not, but I want to know, is there a degree of amnesia of what happened, or did it come back slowly in your memory of the actual event and what?
So there's parts of it that I don't remember. There's parts of it that I'm not sure if I remember correctly, and there's parts of it that I remember very vividly. So but like I said, it's so hard to distinguish between what truly was happening, what I was really seeing, what I wasn't seeing. When you're in that mind state, it's so hard to even know the difference. So,
I think we have another question. Ed?
oh, yes, Ed.
Yes. Yeah, I'm Edmund Creekmore. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm also the father of a son. Uh, he and I both went through something very similar to what you went through. I would be very interested in knowing what type of group training approach. Been a lot of talk about psychoeducation being kind of prophylactic, preventative, but there is a model that is pretty evidence-based and used throughout the country called coordinated specialty care. It's particularly targeted towards young adults, and their family support is absolutely essential to their recovery as well as evidence-based medication. But it uses more of a structured skills building type of approach. And I was just wondering, since we're talking about a forensic setting, what type of structured approach they may have used with you and other um, young adults, maybe who had similar psychotic breaks, who were on the road to stabilization. Did you reach a point where you were able to participate in some type of skills building groups? It's medication support groups. What kind of groups did they use in your program? I would be interested.
So, we had when I was at OFC, they had individual therapy. Most of it was, cognitive behavioral therapy. They did groups as well, which the groups were usually about, 8 to 15 people. And we had, let's see, I'm trying to think, we had all kinds of different, groups that we would do. We had groups on psychology, basic psychology is kind of the stuff you would learn when you're in high school and stuff. They had groups on learning about medications, medication awareness, and the need for medication, the effects of how medications affect your brain, things like that. And uh, we did a lot, like I said, a lot of life skill type stuff. They had stuff. We had groups that they would teach us, things, basic things, but things like how to manage money, things like that, things that I guess they believed that would be helpful for us once we were released back into society.
So more independent living skills, survival skills.
Yeah, that kind of things. They one of the biggest things that they pushed though was the need for med compliance and stuff because which doesn't really, that's not quite like psychology, but it's like that was one thing that they really tried to make sure that people understood was how important medications were, and that's something that I definitely believe in.
Did they deal at all? Did they deal at all? I would be interested in knowing. In Europe, particularly, they have cognitive behavioral training that is specific to psychosis, where they teach about irrational jumping to conclusions from irrational assumptions. You can prove just about anything. When I was a philosophy major, said you could prove just about anything from false premises. And if you are anxious and paranoid, you can jump to just about any type of irrational thought process and poor judgment, impaired judgment imaginable. And they have actually turned this into something of a science, particularly in Germany, where they do this kind of specialized cognitive behavioral. Uh, were you exposed to any of that? It's been around a while now, so I would be surprised if some of the people that worked with you in your program might not have used a similar approach.
So there was a lot of different therapists that I dealt with when I was in there. And yeah, of course, I was lucky in the regard that I wasn't experiencing psychosis actively at the time that I was at the Oklahoma Forensic Center. I was already, pretty asymptomatic at that point. Um, but uh, but yeah, there was be helping, one thing that I did see that they did, and of course, like I said, it wasn't so much me directly, but I know a lot of people, they would be trying to help them to understand that they don't, just because you believe this, just because this is something that makes sense to you, doesn't necessarily mean that this is reality. And they would help people understand, like, hey, maybe what you're experiencing isn't the whole picture, kind of thing. And but like I said, it's kind of hard for me to answer that because I wasn't experiencing. So my therapy was probably looked different than people that were actively experiencing psychosis, if that makes sense.
Well, actually, this approach works more for people who are coming out of psychosis and actually helps prevent their relapsing into psychosis because they're
Okay.
learning a rational model, but they're also learning to discriminate between the irrational thinking with your feelings that contaminated emotional reasoning that you see in bipolar disorder. Uh, but from the vantage point of recovery, where you're developing a more robust recovery because you can see the contrast before and after. So this type of approach they're using that I was describing actually is even more powerful in helping individuals who are coming out of psych. Because I mean, you have to be stabilized on meds to be able to benefit from this. Really, you're not going to benefit a whole lot if you're still hallucinating in a group. That's a
Yeah.
contraindication to having group.
Yeah.
Jeff,
So
did you
thank
have
you for
a
sharing. I
question?
really appreciate that.
Jeff,
Thank you.
I know you had your hand up and then I see Michelle after that. So Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, man, I was wondering how important art has been to your recovery.
So it's been very, very important to me, I believe. Being able to do art the entire time that I was in the system, that really, really helped. My dad's going to grab a couple of my pieces we have sitting here so we can show you guys. But yeah, it was so important to me to be able to, have some direction and have something that I can here tilt it.
I can't.
But to be able to spend my time in there, all the idle time that I had, being able to work on something and work towards a goal in my future, that was really important to me, and it really helped me to be able to process what I was experiencing and my the trauma that I'd gone through, and it made a really, really big difference, I believe. Yeah.
Michelle?
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I just
Yes,
have a
Michelle.
question. So I have a daughter who's in a forensic hospital right now, and my one of my concerns with her is that she doesn't seem to recognize the psychosis that she experienced. So my question to you is, did you she's in the same situation you were in, as far as when she went to the hospital, she was not ill. Did it take you a while to understand the psychosis and be able to identify it? Or were you personally able to identify it? I mean, it made sense to you right away that it was psychosis. How did that play out?
So if you are able to recognize what you're experiencing as psychosis, I don't know if that even qualifies. I mean, the kind of the huge aspect of psychosis is that you don't realize that what you're experiencing isn't reality.
Well, I mean,
So
today she does not see that psychosis.
yes, so there's a condition, I believe it's anosognosia, I believe is what it's called,
Yeah.
where
Yes.
you just do not recognize what you're experiencing as, for what it is, and you don't understand that you're mentally ill. That's a huge symptom. That's a very big problem when it comes to like people relapsing and not taking their medications and things like that. So whenever I was first, whenever I first started experiencing psychosis, I'm sorry, shortly after my mother passed away, I it was pretty easy for me to recognize that the events surrounding her death were due to psychosis, because once I realized what the reality was, that she was gone and what had happened, I knew that I would never have done something like that without psychosis being a huge factor. So I was able to recognize it, luckily in that regard, because I knew, hey, this wouldn't have happened if wasn't seriously wrong with my mind. So I was able to recognize it in that way.
Okay. All right. Thank
Michael, I have a question for you. I know did you right from the beginning know that you wanted to get Matt's story out, and what made you decide to go ahead and do that? And then I wanted you also, because I know we've talked about it, another family that you knew that something similar happened and they did not go the route of getting the story out there. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. At the beginning, we started our, we didn't know what was happening. I mean, we were in shock, obviously, for a long time. And we waited for trial and waited and waited and waited. And we would have a trial where they set a date. We would go up there and nothing would happen. They passed it 17 times. And finally, I just knew I needed to do something. And so I talked to a reporter in Tulsa with the Tulsa World, and she wrote a story. And then the news also did a story on us. And this was about 2 years after. And about the next week, I got a call. We had Laura, she's the public defender. So we had a public defender, and they called me and said, we want you to come to the office and talk. And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble, because they told me that really got people talking at the DA's office and in their office. And so we hope that sped it up a little bit. And so they said that was really a good thing to do. And so we started trying to tell the story at that point. And from that point on, we just knew we needed to tell, because we knew other people were hurting as well. And we just wanted to tell it. And what was the second part of your question?
If you wanted to speak to the person that went through a similar situation, I believe at the same time.
Oh, yes.
And they did
I
not.
also had, yeah, we waived the right to a jury trial. In my support group, I have several others, well, quite everyone also waived the right to jury trial and went to the bench trial. Well, I have one person who is a friend of mine who did not. And their son with diagnosed schizophrenia, 2 hospitalizations as a teenager, 20 years old, had a jury trial. He had actually stabbed and killed his father. And the family just didn't support him. They didn't visit him. No one to this day has ever visited. I've been trying to visit him in prison, but I can't get in. So anyway, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. He's about 23 years old now, and I can't even imagine the horrors that he's experiencing there at a maximum security prison here in Oklahoma. But the family just wanted him gone, both sides, and that I don't understand. I don't understand that.
Jerry, did you have a question?
Ew. So if you could go back, so this all happened what, like about 10, no, 15 years ago?
It was about 12 years ago.
12 years.
So if you could go back, let's go back 13 years ago, right? Or first onset of symptoms. That's kind of described. If you could go back 13 years ago and envision a system that would lead to a different collection of outcomes, what would the system include?
So, a couple of things that I think would be really important. I think that making education for when it comes to mental illness, whether that be depression, anxiety, psychosis, all of that, making that a vital part of education in schools, I think that would be a huge thing. That would be so important, is helping people to understand that. I think that a system where we can get people the help that they need when they need it, and help people that may not even recognize it in themselves. But if we had a community that understood mental illness and that could help to get people the treatment that they wanted and give them the support, and we could get rid of the stigma that's attached to mental illness. And that's why I think so many people are resistant to going and seeking treatment, is because even if they can find the treatment, they're so scared to do it because they don't want to be viewed as, quote unquote, some crazy person. They don't want to be viewed as somebody who is seriously ill. They don't want to be viewed as somebody who a lot of people look down upon. So I think that if we could foster that compassion in our communities and help people to see that and to understand that the mentally ill are there are brothers and sisters, our daughters, our sons, our parents, our neighbors. I mean, there are people in our communities. There are people that we love, and they don't need to be put in a prison. They don't need to be put in a jail. They need to be able to get treatment, and we need a world where they're not afraid to seek this treatment. So.
But is that what is that? I mean, why is that why this happened in your family, because of stigma?
Not necessarily because of stigma, but I've seen numerous cases in people that I've known that's a lot of the reason why they don't get the help that they need.
Well, we didn't get treatment because we were basically put on hold. We were told that this hospital didn't do it, and we were put into a group that was about, 3 months away.
So yeah, not having ready access to treatment was one of the huge things. But also we didn't understand what mental illness was. We didn't understand how severe it could be, or what these symptoms I was experiencing were symptoms of. And that was one of the big reasons why.
Yeah, my wife had just lost her job, and with that, our insurance. And so until she was able to do that, we went with Native American health care. And that's why we were at the Claremore Indian, what's called the Claremore Indian Hospital. And they just don't have the care.
My son had your same diagnosis, Matthew. And he was very scary to me. And I was very much afraid that he would do something while psychotic. And he didn't want care because he didn't perceive there was anything wrong with him. He refused care. So I don't know that education and reduction of stigma is going to save people like my son, who died 5 years ago from suicide. So that's where I'm kind of leaning into this a bit harder, because I agree with you that stigma is a problem. I agree with you that psychoeducation is lacking, but I don't quite think we're thinking the same in terms of what would really have prevented what happened.
So first off, I'm really sorry to hear about your son. I would say that, with education though, I think that if we had a reduction in stigma, we had education, if your son truly, I don't know for sure, because I didn't know him, but I think that if just any person generally experiencing mental health problems, if we understand, like let me just tell you my situation. If I would have understood what my symptoms were, I would have known what they were. And if I was able, or like I said, other people, if we are able to not have to be in fear of seeking treatment. I mean, like I said, I don't know if, like I said, I don't know the situation with your son for sure exactly, but I think that those are really important. And there are, I'm sure, I mean, can you think of anything that was also really important that, I'm sorry,
It's really
I'm,
interesting. Do you believe you could have understood your illness if it had been explained to you better? And it's very possibly true because some people are capable of insight
well,
and understanding their illness. My son was not capable. It wouldn't have mattered how hard people tried to teach.
well,
I mean, it sounds like Matt actually had some insight before he experienced the psychosis because he went to get treatment. Whereas some people never get to that point. So it sounds like, once he was in psychosis, he didn't recognize what it was, but leading up to that, he recognized that something, was not right.
and I think that's another thing with the education. It's not necessarily just for the individual that's experiencing the mental illness. It's the entire community. It's our family members, it's our loved ones. If the community could understand what that person, what your son was experiencing, that might have I don't know. It might have helped to make a difference. I don't know. Um, that's a very, very difficult thing. I'm sorry to
I
navigate.
deeply appreciate your position, and I can answer that question. It wouldn't have made any difference because I had providers telling me they knew how sick he was and that his level of psychosis was dangerous, but the law would not allow them to do anything.
The law would not allow it.
The law would not allow it. So it's a different can of worms, but I just think it's very interesting, and I deeply appreciate your perspective, Matthew. So thank you for letting me kind of dive into that.
Of course.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Jessica?
Hi. So with being not guilty, found not guilty and put into a hospital with, unknown time frame, how does one stay in that realm and maintain hope and happiness or I don't know, just hopeful, I guess. Like I feel like if I were in that position personally, it would just be devastating. So it just seems unimaginable. So how do you I guess either I don't know if you want to call it hope or just stay
So
good mindset.
devastating and unimaginable. We're still very much a part of it. And whenever I say that, we found hope through it all, that doesn't mean that it was easy. That doesn't mean that we didn't feel hopelessness as well. It was just we didn't we didn't let that be all that we saw, I guess. I told myself it was actually whenever I was first and uh, shortly after I realized what had happened to my mom, I ended up attempting suicide twice, and I survived luckily. But after that happened, I just told myself, I was like, I'm not going to give up. I can't do this. I can't let this, whatever this is that's happening, I can't let this win, and I chose to, I reached out to God and I told him, hey, I don't know what this is. I don't know what's happening. And I said, I can't do this. There's no way. And I believe in, there's no way I could have done it without something more helping me, without God helping me. And I just chose to hold on to that, to the belief, whether no matter how, how crazy as it may have seemed at the time, the belief that somehow I was going to come through this and that I was going to make it. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes there is no reason to have hope, but you hope anyway. So
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you. And with that, I don't see any more questions. So I think we will end it here. Matt and Michael, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. You are both helping people much more than you even realize.
Well, thank you for letting us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate it, of course.
And this will be up on our YouTube channel. I'll get it up there sometime tomorrow. And Matt and Michael, I'll send you the link so you'll have it and you can share it as well.
And okay. Can you remind me the website for his artwork? If we
Artbymattstick.com.
Artbymattstick.com.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Of course.